Hi everyone, welcome to the third AGA Sessions where we focus on the client and end user at their home. Today's guest is my brother Paul Goldreich, who's a psychoanalyst, and we're going to be discussing the role of the room in our life. Hi Paul.
There we are. Hi,
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Almost forgot to go live, so we're live now.
Great. Okay.
From London and Eastbourne. So
Indeed, we are.
so I quickly introduced today's chat, and I thought the title of the room is an appropriate title.
Yeah, that's very.
And before we start, I just thought that maybe you can slightly introduce yourself and how you practice as a psychoanalyst, and maybe briefly touch, because you follow the Jung method, so very briefly just explain what that means.
Okay. Well, I'm a Jungian analyst. I've been a Jungian analyst for about 28 years. I've worked variously in the NHS, and I now work completely privately. Being a Jungian analyst is nowadays, of course, it's and particularly in this country, in a way, is not profoundly different from being either a Freudian analyst or a Kleinian analyst, although the theories are different, and the histories are different. Nevertheless, the actual practice in the consulting room is generally quite similar. Maybe we can talk a bit about those similarities and the importance of the consulting room.
Yeah. So jumping straight into your consulting room.
Yeah.
Can you describe what it looks like?
Yes, I can do that.
And are there any important features?
Yeah, one of the really significant things about a consulting room, as opposed to I guess any other room, is the significance of the space. And from a psychoanalytic point of view, the space must be very secure. There are serious issues of confidentiality within the analytic frame, and so there are certain ethical obligations that faces a therapist or a counselor or an analyst when they come to working with a patient. The space must be safe, and it must be secure. In other words, that other people can't come into the session during session times. That's very important. Now, for Jung, quite specifically, the room for him is determined by the idea that was expounded by the Greeks, and they used a very specific term or a Greek word to denote the very specific requirements of a quiet space, and that was called temenos. And it basically denotes a sacred and protected space. And psychologically, this is descriptive of both a personal container and the sense of privacy that surrounds the analytic relationship.
Interesting.
these temenos spaces were developed by the Greeks and the Romans, specifically around a courtyard with a garden, and often with a fountain in the middle. And these were places of contemplation, but they were very quiet, and they were very sacred.
So in terms of the actual design of the consulting room,
Yes.
is it minimal? Do you have
Objects?
what objects in it, or
well,
is
it
there,
varies. It varies between the different psychoanalytic schools.
is there a specific code that one needs to follow, or?
I mean, there is always, if you're an analyst, there is always a couch.
Yeah.
And the big question in analytic circles is where the analyst sits. Now, we know obviously that for Freudians, the seated position is behind the couch. The same really is true of Kleinian analysts. But interestingly, Jung was much less prescriptive about this. So Jungian analysts tend to sit to the side of the patient. And I tend to sit slightly behind the patient, but also to the side. And this was important for Jung, so that the patient could actually see the analyst, if they chose to do so. So there's a couch, there's a chair, there's the analyst chair. Now, I actually like to have books in my consulting room. Many analysts do. And other than that, the room really needs to be a sort of reverential place. You can't have photographs of yourself or your family hanging up, because this is really antithetical to the whole neutral environment.
Yeah.
So some analysts like a much more neutral environment, and some prefer a slightly less. I'm somewhere in the middle. Okay. I don't have particularly personal things in my consulting room, although obviously my books are personal to me. Yeah. But they're also more neutral too. Other than that, no. I mean, you wouldn't have. I mean, I do have pictures on the walls, but they're very neutral pictures.
Okay, that's interesting. Well, obviously things have changed in the past.
Yeah,
almost, yeah, almost 2 months.
Sorry.
Yes. So now you're practicing remotely.
Yes.
And you're also seeing your patients remotely, which throw a lot of questions about privacy, intimacy, that
Yes.
kind of boundary between a personal space and ethics that you have as a therapist and your patients. So I'm gonna raise a few issues, and I think maybe if we can discuss. So
yeah.
So I guess one is you lose intimacy and privacy of being in the same room as your patients. So suddenly they have a glimpse into your private world.
That's right.
And you have a glimpse to theirs.
Yes.
Obviously, the technology allows us to change the background, our background, and so on. So how does this affect your work and the therapy in general?
Well, those are all very interesting questions and very important statements that you've made. It was a fundamental. I mean, I've never worked remotely before. Some people do, and I never have. It was a huge change for me, specifically because of for me, because of the ethical issues that one's confronted by. So this is the first time, in a way, that your patients will see you in your home. I've made that extremely neutral. In fact, so I'm sitting in a room, which in the corner of a room, with my laptop in front of me, and all that the patient can see is the neutral wall behind me. The obverse, of course, is extremely profound, which is that I can see not only the patient, who I know, but I can also see the inside of their houses, in some cases their bedrooms, in some instances their bed. And this is an absolutely profound change to the whole process of the therapy. The really important question is whether you can conduct a therapy or an analysis from an emotional point of view with somebody who is not in the same room as you. Yeah. That's a really significant issue. Some people have argued quite strongly that you can't at all. And I have some colleagues who believe that analytic work is definitely possible through the internet. In a way, I've been forced to do this, to work in this particular way, and I feel that that there is good work that can be done through this remote method, but it raises really difficult challenges, both for the therapist and for the patient, I think.
Do the patients, do they dress up their space especially for the consultation?
No, they don't. But what is interesting is that with some patients, you may very well be in their living room. And I suppose the issue really is about the boundary of that. Yeah. So some people are very open about their homes, and in fact they might even walk around, which of course is completely alien from an analytical or therapy point of view. The other thing, of course, is that they're not lying on a couch. They could even be talking to you from their kitchen. And so you really have to adapt a lot, in a way, both your technique, but also your understanding of the work that you're conducting in this kind of environment, because it's not the same.
Yeah. So would you say there's some benefit in that, because as a therapist you maybe understand your patients a bit more because you see how they behave in their own very personal space?
Yes, well, it is very interesting. I think there are things that that people, in a way, because they're in their safe space, in their temenos, as it were, and they're inviting you into their space, not the other way around, which is what happens when they come to your consulting room. You're inviting them into your space, but you're actually being invited into their space, which is intensely personal. And I think that in a positive way, that changes some of the dynamic of the interaction in a way that otherwise I don't think you would experience if you weren't doing this kind of work. So it is very significant.
Would you consider offering a remote therapy in the future when we're back to normal, or probably not?
Well, I don't. I mean, it is really interesting, because there are some people who are saying, actually, they really value the experience of it in a very different kind of way. And so I'm going to have to think about it very carefully. I mean, the problem is that I miss going to work.
Yeah. I think we all do. In some respect, I think kind of missing going into another room,
Exactly.
which is not in your home.
That's right.
So I've seen people
yeah.
starting to work from their car, for instance.
Oh wow. Well, you know what's really interesting, Amos, is that the other aspect of this, of course, is that one's home becomes a workplace.
Yeah.
Now, for some people, that's fine, and there are many people, of course, who do work from home.
Yeah.
I mean, I did have a consulting room in a house that I lived in London,
yeah.
but it wasn't in the house.
Yeah.
It was next to the house.
Yeah.
This is very different. This is a very different experience. And of course, the other additional issue, and this raises all sorts of other ethical issues, is that in this lockdown, my family is in the house. So there are other noises that are going on that ordinarily my patients would not be hearing.
Yeah.
The children shouting at each other, for example.
Yeah.
Or the dogs barking. or the delivery coming with the food, or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
These are things that are not normally going on in a consulting room. But I have to say that it really doesn't affect the exchange or the interaction between me and the patients. They don't even mention it.
Okay, that's good to know.
Which is good. Yeah. But I've tried very much to minimize the impact of the noise by making sure that people don't come upstairs.
Yes. Well, we've got a few more minutes left, and I thought, I think because you're a youngest analyst, and we're talking about the room, I think it's especially interesting because of Jung's theory and the way he describes the dream as a house.
Yes.
The conscious and unconscious.
That's right. Yes.
So maybe you can start kind of touch on that a bit.
Yes. Well, in a way, I mean, space for Jung was fundamentally important, and he lived in a house by a lake, and he really he loved that house. He had a very important dream when he was younger, which actually laid the foundation for his understanding of the structures of the unconscious. And it just so happened that that dream was about a house, a building, with different structures and substructures. And one of the fundamental sort of tenets of Jungian analysis is the idea of the self, and that's one of the very key things that we try and locate and understand, both in ourselves but also in our patients, is how their psyches are structured. And I mean, in a way, the number of times that patients have reported dreams to me which contain structures, either houses or buildings, or lakes or seas or oceans or mountains, are too numerous to mention, really. but I suppose the fundamental aspect of this is that in all of us, the notion of a home or a room or a space is what Jung would refer to as an archetypal structure in the psyche.
Mm-hmm.
This is not something that is that's in a way that's learned. It's a fundamental aspect in a way of being a human being, and this is this really significant part, I think, of why. I mean, I suppose it's the sort of architecture of the mind, really, is what we're talking about.
Yeah, really interesting.
And space and location are the building blocks of that understanding.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really what we get from fundamentally from Jung.
We have a very interesting question here. Have any patients preferred to take a break from therapy rather than continue online?
That's a very good question. No.
Oh, interesting.
No, that none of my patients have. However, well, no, that's not true. One patient did, has, but actually he is a doctor, so he's had to do that for work. So, but otherwise, no one has.
Okay. If anyone has questions, we still have some time left, so please comment below. Paul, any kind of final words maybe about this difficult times that we're in, and I guess well-being is very important, and thinking positive thoughts, and
well, I mean, I think it's one of the extraordinary things about this lockdown, which I think it's a rather it's a very strange sort of time that we're in, because whilst the majority of us are in lockdown in our homes, of course, all of the people who are ill, and all of the doctors and the nurses and the carers and the delivery drivers and all of the really fundamentally important people who are keeping our world going, are not at home in lockdown. They're actually functioning and working. And it's very easy for people to kind of become quite dislocated from what's going on in the rest of the world, actually. So I suppose the thing is that it's really important to continue to think and to understand and to respond to what's going on in relation to this virus. And it impacts very profoundly, and is impacting very profoundly on people's sense of security. And it's really fundamentally important to be able to think in terms of community through this period.
Great. Thank you, Paul.
Okay.
Any just seeing if there's any last questions. posted something. No. So
Okay.
thanks very much, Paul, for joining
Good.
us.
Yeah, it's been good.
Yeah, love to everyone, and stay
Yes.
safe.
You too.
And all right, bye
Take
everyone.
care.
Thanks
Bye.
for joining. Bye.
Bye.
Our sessions will continue next week. We're just finalizing the guest list, so we'll post details on Instagram and LinkedIn. Thanks. Good night.
Bye. Good night.